All right, welcome everyone to this week's meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I am Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, before we get started tonight, I want to just discuss with you for a moment a very special in-person meeting to take place on September 28th. It's a rare opportunity to talk with a titan in sports journalism. Award-winning journalist Melissa Lutke reported and wrote for Sports Illustrated and Time and was the editor of Neiman Reports at Harvard University's Neiman Foundation. And she's going to be with us Saturday afternoon, September 28th at 12:30 to talk about her new book, Locker Room Talk, A Woman's Struggle to Get Inside. If you have any questions about that, feel free to send me an email directly at bruce@brucemcclurenh.com, and I'll be happy to give you directions to our home here in New London and possibly give you a list of things that we might need to put on the party. So now that we've gotten through that, I want to talk about news and notes with chapter members. If anybody here has something that they'd like to discuss that they're working on, research, anything like that, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit react and then hit raise hand, and we will get you in so that you can discuss that with all of us. So I'll give you just a minute if anybody has any news and notes. No news and notes this week. That's okay. Oh, Glenn, you're up. Go ahead. You got to unmute, my friend.
I just wanted to mention that through this wonderful association, I connected with Gary Mintz, who was one of the guests recently. Well, not terribly recently, but recently. And I produced I had a San Francisco Giants poster that I had wanted to reframe and add baseball cards to. And I did that, and I communicated with him and told him that it was his if he wanted it. And he had one as a child, the same poster, but not, of course, with the baseball cards that I had added to it. And he was supposed to be in Lancaster, which is where I live, this weekend. And we were going to exchange. I was going to finally give it to him because it cost $60 to ship, which is ridiculous. But at any rate, if anybody, since that trip for him got canceled, if anybody has a way for me to get this product from me in Lancaster to him where he lives, that would be wonderful. We're trying to work that out as we go, but it's been a project of love and fun, and I want to do it for him for all of the good he's done for baseball and SABR and everything.
Gary Mintz is one of the good guys. He really is. His New York Giants Preservation Society is a fabulous organization, and his book is so much fun to read. And the nice part about it is if you have a Kindle, you can read it for free if you search him in the app. So if you haven't done that already, do that. Glenn, are you in Lancaster, Pennsylvania? I forget.
Yes, Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
How close are you to Millersville Road?
Oh, very close.
Oh,
I'm right around the corner from it. My sister lives on right off Millersville Road.
Oh, for heaven's sake. A million years ago, I worked for APA.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I don't want to tell you how long ago that was because I'll be dating myself, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah. Yes, it was probably when I was scrolling it. I mean, not scrolling it because I didn't have a computer, but when I was trolling it as a potential client.
Oh, gosh. A long time ago.
Yes.
Anybody else this evening?
Thanks.
All right, let's get started with our feature presentation. New York Yankees outfielder Jake Powell was the first Major League Baseball player ever disciplined for a racist statement or action. In tonight's presentation, Matt Jacob will revisit this 1938 incident, which unfolded during a live radio interview. Matt will explore how baseball officials and white sports writers dodged, downplayed, and distracted from Powell's hateful words. SABR member Matt Jacob is a member of the Bob Davids chapter of SABR. He is a public health consultant and the author of 2 books. The second of those 2 books is Globetrotter, How Abe Saperstein Shook Up the World of Sports, which will be published in October 24 by Rowman and Littlefield. His biography explores the life of Saperstein, who founded the Harlem Globetrotters basketball team and helped to hasten the integration of baseball's major leagues. Matt collects baseball press passes and other sports memorabilia from the 20th century and resides in Arlington, Virginia, and he is here tonight to talk to us about Jake Powell. Matt Jacob, welcome to Northern New England, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Glad to have you. I'm just going to step back and give it all to you.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen and hope that PowerPoint behaves itself. So this is a story, incidentally, that I just kind of stumbled on. I had not heard anything about the Jake Powell episode until I was doing research with my brother on the book that is coming out in October on Abe Saperstein. And I just stumbled upon this in one of the books that I'd read and wanted to dig in and just learn as much as I could. Let me see here. I'm going to stop my share. Sure enough, let me do this here. Okay, I'm going to have to try it this way. Okay, now we'll do it. And there we go. Okay. Yay. You know, they always say reboot, right? So Jake Powell, from the very start of his major league career, was a pretty troubled soul. And we're going to kind of dig into that for just a moment. So before he made it to the majors, he played minor leagues a few different places. One of the teams he played for was the Dayton Ducks. Great cap. I love that cap. He was caught at one point trying to leave his hotel room with a whole variety of things. We're not talking about towels. We're talking about an electric fan, the drapes, a bedspread. So this was somebody who was definitely venturing into what we would call larceny. He ended up returning every one of those items and avoided criminal charges. But he had a manager for the Ducks who later said Powell was always getting into trouble. Once he made it to the majors, I don't know that there was an awful lot of attempted robbery or anything of that sort, but the misbehavior kind of took a different but more ugly sort of vintage to it. And so in 1936, he's playing at that time for the Washington Nationals, aka Senators, and he runs out a ground ball and collides with Hank Greenberg at first base. There are different versions about it. Did he run out of the baseline? Did he, was it his fault completely, mostly? In any case, Hank Greenberg, who was never much of a complainer and at the time did not have much to say about it, did in his autobiography years later say that he hated playing against Washington. And you can bet it wasn't because the Tigers lost a ton of games to Washington. That was a period of time when the Nationals weren't a super stellar team. But he said it was because they engaged in a lot of dirty tricks. And the example he gave was Jake Powell running into me for no reason. Just a few months later in that same season, umpires had to get in between Powell and Zeke Bonura, the first baseman for the White Sox. A very similar collision, Powell running down toward first. And it was, the Chicago Tribune summed it up this way. They said Powell is the, quote, high spike artist of the Senators. So 2 days after that incident with the White Sox, Washington decides they're ready to say bye-bye to Jake Powell. Interestingly, the player they got in exchange for him from the New York Yankees was none other than Ben Chapman. If that name rings a bell, there's a good reason. Ben Chapman, of course, years later would be the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies and was known from within the dugout, leading a variety of ugly, racist chants and slurs at Jackie Robinson when he hit the field for the Dodgers. But that was years to come. But Chapman had a kind of similar checkered image of being, I think this is perhaps putting it very nicely. The Evening Star in Washington said that Chapman is a high-strung type of player. This was kind of a situation of kind of trading one rowdy player for another. Chapman was considered better defensively. Powell was considered a little better at the bat. Not sure if that always held true, but that was kind of the general take. That October, there was a moment, this moment where Jake Powell could have turned the corner, largely because the fans were thrilled with his performance in New York in the World Series. He batted .455 and was a big part of the reason why the Yankees won that World Series in 6 games over the Giants. And so, here he is, he's center stage, a beloved guy. And here we are then 2 years later, about a year and a half later, the Yankees are in Chicago. They're playing a road series against the White Sox. And before the game, WGN's Bob Elson interviews Powell in the Yankees dugout. He asked him a question that really should not have been difficult to give a pretty humdrum kind of answer to. And this was his question. How do you keep in trim during the winter months in order to keep up your batting average? Powell's chosen answer was one that included a racial slur. And blackjack was a slang term for nightstick, for those of you who might be curious about that. So the sort of side bar to this is that statement is not only offensive, it's actually a lie. He wasn't hired as a policeman in the offseason. There were times when Powell had a desire to join the police force. He would talk about it periodically, but he wasn't on the police force. So it was not just something that kind of fell out of the mouth as he wanted to talk about what he did in the offseason. So it was kind of offensive on 2 levels, I suppose. So the aftermath of this, right away, Elson apologizes, WGN terminates the live feed, he leaves the dugout. The next day, leaders of the Black community in Chicago gather and march to the stadium. They demand that the league and the White Sox take action. Commissioner Landis does take action. He hands down a 10-game suspension for Powell. Now, that was not as severe a penalty as Black leaders wanted. And just for example, these are three publications in prominent newspapers in Black America. Chicago Defender called him a professional bully. They wanted Major League Baseball to ban him. Given the era, given prevailing attitudes about language and what's appropriate and not, probably not very realistic, although you can certainly understand why they wanted that. The New York Age article you see over to your right, and this was done as a commentary on it was kind of jokingly referred to as Powell's apology tour. So I tried to dig and find as much as I could. Not a lot is written about it. I would guess that the Yankees arranged behind the scenes for Powell to be taken up to Harlem and have some kind of publicity photos, maybe walk into a few clubs, restaurants, taverns, say he was sorry to some prominent person. But the New York Age was just outraged that Powell basically denied. His initial statement was, "Oh, I didn't use that word. I didn't mean to use any offensive word like that. I'm sure I didn't use it." So that was kind of a part of the frustration. Jeff Cohen has his hand up. I don't know if anybody else does, but Jeff, go ahead if you want to ask your question.
I'll wait till the end of the presentation.
Okay, great. So Pittsburgh Courier, I think many of you know the famous Wendell Smith, a sports editor, sports writer there. He took the kind of approach he generally took, which is the glass is half full. He tried to kind of throw MLB a bone and say, hey, this is a good sign. They don't want their fans to be humiliated who happen to be members of the Black community. I don't know why this is, let me try this again here. The advance is not working too well on this. Here we go. Okay, let me try this again.
The mysteries of the interwebs.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you got to expect things like this since, PowerPoint is a brand new application, of course. So those things happen, right? Okay.
Perfect.
So MLB, the Yankee officials, and the media, how did they react to all of this? It was certainly on the whole, I think, pretty deplorable, especially from today's perspective. Powell, again, as I said, he tried to minimize what he said. Oh, first he said, I didn't really use that word. Then at one point he said, my words weren't meant the way I said them. Okay, try and unscramble that. Kennesaw Landis, you could also argue, despite the suspension, did give Powell some cover by saying that, in his view, the racist remark was more a case of carelessness. The Yankees officials did not exactly earn a gold star on this front either. Jacob Rupert said it was an unintended slip of the tongue. And then to make matters worse, Rupert said that his black servants agreed with his view. For those of you who believe that his black servants would shake their head and say, no, you're wrong. I'd like to meet you sometime. But anyway, so yeah, pretty ridiculous comment. People who owed their jobs to him are not exactly going to tell him if they disagree. The business manager of the Yankees, Edward Barrow, said that it just popped out. It wasn't intended as an insult. And then Joe McCarthy kind of downplayed it as a wisecrack. So sporting news, never great on race issues during this era, the 30s and 40s. They also tried to minimize, he could have been more careful, but he's a hustling player, aggressive, and always getting into a jam. What goes unspoken there, of course, is that a lot of times the jams are of his own making. The mainstream media, i.e. white media, was also really mishandled this, if you want to talk about an error off the field. They tried to use as a scapegoat, a red herring, this idea that, it was the impromptu interview that did it. There was a sports writer in Iowa said, Elson made a mountain out of a molehill. The player's doing him a favor by doing the interview, and he, quote, tossed him into the arena and let the lions come at him. Poor Jake Powell. Sports writer in Ohio said, it's too bad Jake spoke out of turn when they shoved a Chicago mic under his nose. This was the kind of characterization that you saw. There's a Pennsylvania sports columnist. We should all be wary of any remarks we might make over the radio in which we don't have a script with us, because if you don't have a script, you're going to shout out racial slurs, of course. That's a common problem if you don't have a script. So, it is really kind of puzzling from today's perspective. But again, I think it does tell you how the gut level immediate reaction was to downplay, wasn't really meant to be any serious offense, that kind of thing. Joe McCarthy didn't make matters any better. He criticized radio stations, said they were bothering players while they were on duty. The truth is, impromptu dugout interviews were not a new thing in 1938. In fact, Elson had been conducting them at games at Comiskey Park for several years before that. And let's be clear, too, Elson was not some kind of cagey, unpredictable, aggressive broadcaster. I mean, many of you know Bob Elson had a tremendous reputation. In fact, Landis gave him the nod as the broadcaster he wanted to do the play-by-play for baseball's first All-Star game in the early 1930s. So, this idea that that Bob Elson was sort of lying in wait to scramble and ambush somebody is pretty ridiculous. There were some exceptions that I think deserve attention. And in the white press, the Morning Call in northern New Jersey took Powell to task, and they went even further. They said it was time for integration to happen. And this columnist said that black players would not only fit in the major leagues, but would undoubtedly shine there. So, coming as it did, 7 years before Jackie Robinson was signed, and 9 years before he hit the field for the Dodgers, it speaks well of the newspaper that they were sort of there at this stage. There was a syndicated columnist who generally was talking about political stuff, not sports. His name was Westbrook Pegler. He wrote that Major League Baseball, quote, has always treated the Negroes as Adolf Hitler treats the Jews. I mean, I was kind of surprised that he hurled that little grenade to Major League Baseball's way. Not because there's not some validity to that statement, but again, it kind of tells you that he was very isolated in making that kind of a very provocative statement. And you know, I think his second statement was very apt, right? That Powell was only giving expression in crude, brief wordage to the unspoken but inflexible segregation policy. So that was kind of the story. I think, you know, the mainstream news media, Major League Baseball, the New York Yankees organization really didn't show up on this one and did not take the posture and project a message that they really should have. Now, Jake Powell's career in life really went kind of in downward spiral at this point. You know, initially he returned after his suspension. The Yankees are on a road trip in Washington, and so here are the fans that you know he used to perform in front of. But what he didn't have going for him was he was in the outfield, and the area of the outfield where he played was where black fans generally were sitting when they went to Griffith Stadium. So there may have been kind of some very fortuitous element to that, but the fans, as you can imagine, were not very happy, and they decided they were going to show their sentiments, and they hurled soda and beer bottles. So Joe McCarthy was furious about all this, and he was defiant. He told the media, "Hey, I'm going to keep playing him. It doesn't matter. You know, Powell was generally a platoon player, but you know." McCarthy said, "Look, I'm going to play him. I don't care how many bottles they throw at him." And nonetheless, you know, very obvious and very clear message from McCarthy, but it didn't turn out to be the case. Powell started only one of the Yankees' next 28 games. There were a couple others he was in. He pinch hit in one. He was a pinch runner in another. But basically, McCarthy was not using him. And so, you know, exactly why and whether he just didn't want to go there and potentially encourage more bottle throwers, who knows. Powell had a lot of injuries and inconsistency in the years ahead. In 39, the Yankees re-signed him. May have been that they didn't, you know, they couldn't find another team that would essentially buy the rights to Powell. Maybe they hoped to at least get something for him. And hope that in the deal, a team might feel like, hey, he'll get over this if he comes to our team. He struggled at the plate in 39, not a good time for him. In 1940, during spring training, he crashed into the fence, was trying to catch a ball. He ended up being diagnosed with a skull fracture, and he was out until mid-May, didn't come north until then. And that year did not turn out well for him. The press coverage doesn't give a lot of detail, but it does sound as though he had some lingering problems with his balance and some other issues there as he was trying to get reacclimated. The next 2 years, he's demoted to the minor leagues. He plays in a variety of cities. And eventually, you know, this was kind of a circle here, right? He goes back to Washington. The Nationals obtain him from a minor league team. And he plays on and off for parts of 3 seasons, but doesn't get a lot of action. And then in 45, surprise, Washington trades him to the Phillies, and the manager there is Ben Chapman. You know, so it's always interesting how these things kind of crop up again. Powell did not have a good 45. He batted just .218. And by October, his baseball career is over. And things don't really get much better outside of baseball for him. He's in Washington, D.C. It's November of 1948. Florida police have issued a warrant for Powell. They say he's been passing bad checks. Word gets transmitted to the police in Washington, D.C., and they also thought in D.C. that he was passing bad checks locally. So they arrest him. And I don't quite know how somebody can enter police headquarters and have a gun on them and not be searched. I suppose because the offense that they were arresting him for was not a violent offense, they may have been less diligent about checking him or patting him down. In any case, it's not clear where in the police building, but he whipped out a gun, shoots himself, and he dies, a matter of minutes later. In any player's death, however lamentable their behavior may be, it's hard to think of a silver lining, but perhaps there is. Steve Wolf of ESPN put it this way: there's an irony to the life of Jake Powell. He inadvertently opened a national dialogue that helped pave the way for baseball's integration. One of his wrongs did help to make a right. That was Wolf's take on it. It's worth discussing, worth debating. In any case, I want to thank you for your time. This was research that came out of the book that came during the process of doing the research on the book on Saperstein, which Bruce mentioned. I think many of you know he, besides Satchel Paige, he did a lot to help keep, especially the Negro American League, going with barnstorming games, which were a key source of revenue for them. And he booked a lot of those because he had great contacts in the Midwest where the Globetrotters traveled. So in any case, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this research with you, and any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them.
If you have a question for Matt Jacob this evening, go down to the bottom of the screen. I'm seeing it happen already. You're going to hit the react button, and then up will come raise hand, and you will get in line to speak to our presenter this evening, Matt Jacob. I am going to go to Jeff Cohen first because he was first up with the question. Jeff, you're on.
Thank you, Bruce. And thank you, Matt, for that very interesting presentation. I have a question and a couple of comments. First, my comment is, it's unfortunately we're still seeing it today. I mean, we all heard what happened with Jaron Duran of the Red Sox. He was only suspended 2 games, and he came back to a lot of applause, and he was cheered upon his return, which I thought was not right, but be that as it may. I did want to ask you about Matt Powell. And how did his teammates react? I mean, on his team, it was Bill Dickey, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Frank Corsetti, Tony Lazzari. I was wondering, did they make any comments after this incident?
Yeah, Jeff, I wish I had a good answer for you on that. I scoured media coverage. I did not have the time really to scour biographies. I glanced at a few of them to see, was this something that some of his teammates like Bill Dickey comment on? So it's possible they did have something to say, but the sense I got was their view, and probably the team's front office reinforced it, was let it go, let's forget it, don't bring it up if anybody asks you questions. And that's kind of an attitude which I think we all know, whether it's a scandal in corporate America or wherever, there is this sense of pretend it's not there, the elephant in the room, if we ignore it, it will just go away. It's unfortunate that happened, we're moving on. So I don't have much comment on that. It would have been interesting to see what his teammates did think about it.
And my last comment has to you quoted the Sporting News in your presentation, and I found this out recently reading some baseball books that they were kind of anti-Semitic back in the 30s and 40s back in the last century, and so this did not surprise me how they reacted. Again, thank you for that presentation.
Thanks, Jeff.
Great comments by Jeff. I'm going to go to Ryan McClanahan. Ryan, you're up. How you doing?
Good, thank you. This was really interesting. So Jake Powell, he's the #1 card in the 1939 play ball.
It is hard to hear you, Ryan, just to let you know.
Can you hear me now?
Much better.
Okay, cool. So Jake Powell is he's the #1 card in the 1939 play ball set. And I'm just kind of curious if why would he be the #1 card in that set if like this had occurred the year prior? I think, I don't know, maybe because kids were collecting cards back then too. This, I don't know if this would have set a good precedent for that kind of behavior. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm kind of mystified by it. But as Jeff sort of alluded to, he didn't explicitly mention this detail, but there have been reports that Jaron Duran's jersey sales are taking off after the whole incident that he had with the anti-gay comment that he made. So I don't know. Was there a kind of defensive thing going on there? That would I would hesitate to speculate too much. I just don't know, but that's the first I've heard of that. So yeah, that's news to me.
Glenn
Thank
Bassey,
you.
you're up.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I want to say thank you very much for this presentation. It's an item that's been very close to my mind for a number of years. Some years ago, I ran across the information that Bill Veeck had considered integrating baseball in 1942. And that started me in the interest of research, going into what players would he have recruited for the 1942 Phillies, or 43 Phillies. And in that experience, I ran across the Jake Powell story. And it's an amazing vision into our society. And I would say that Jonathan Ives' King, A Life, is a wonderful example of understanding what was going on in that period of time. And I think understanding what was going on in that period of time is probably the most important thing that we can do to bring perspective to this moment.
Yeah, Glenn, thanks for the comments. And I think we have a tendency to speak sometimes of the Jim Crow South, right? We hear that term a lot, and we have to realize, and what my brother and I grasped right away as we dug in and did a lot of research on the Globetrotters book was, hell, I mean, wherever they went, Minneapolis, for example, right? The Sabres meeting was there just, recently. They had problems there getting hotels, finding hotels for the players. There were a lot of barriers. Satchel Paige couldn't just go into any hotel when he was in North Dakota. And, and they have a Tony Stone sign. Yeah. I mean, the barriers were nationwide. The intensity, I think, was more so in the South, but I think that, we have to be mindful of that. And I think context is huge. So yeah, I appreciate the comment.
Thank you very much.
Great stuff. Let's go on. Alex Stace, you're up. How you doing, Alex?
Good, thanks. Good presentation. I guess one thing, I certainly no excuse for his comment, but I guess in hearing your story about his demise, it does sound like he really could have used some professional counseling and what have you, which obviously was not prevalent at that time in American life. But the idea of ignoring his comments was shameful on a couple of levels. I noticed in that article that you posted that Mr. Edgar, I think it was W.W. Edgar, the first slide maybe that you showed, and it said that he was supposed to have uttered this comment. So it sounded like that sports writer was trying to pretend that this thing hadn't even happened, which I thought was interesting, and wondering whether you had any insight into that particular episode.
Yeah, the background of it was a live interview, and it was not taped by WGN Radio. So they had no transcript, no audio transcript that they could play for Judge Landis. No idea whether he ever requested to hear one or not. But the uproar was so immediate that I think it was pretty baseless for anybody to say, "Oh, he didn't say that." You just imagine that word. But by the same token, because there wasn't a transcript of it that was recorded, it did open the door to someone like Powell, who initially said, I didn't say that word, and then very quickly said, well, my words didn't mean what you may have heard, or, a lot of tangled explanations from there. But I think your point is well taken, that this was clearly a pretty troubled soul. I mean, in various ways, and it would have been, today, I think we would have seen perhaps a mental health dimension to this, and not just viewed it as, oh, he's rude and obnoxious and he steals things, which may be the case, but we would have probably seen it in a little more of a textured way. So, I do appreciate the comment.
Let's keep it going here. Andre DaCosta, you're up. Andre, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Great.
Yeah, so, Matt, you mentioned the Patterson newspaper that offered the condemnation of Powell and the endorsement of integration back in 1938. Have you seen, like, what was the sentiment amongst white media at the time, where offering condemnations of Powell's actions or a broader support of integration at that time before World War II?
Yeah, the morning call really stuck out like a sore thumb in taking that position. I wasn't able to find any other sort of white mainstream newspaper where that position was taken. So, I mean, it was definitely quite bold. I think, segregation of baseball was a topic that does come up in our book about Saperstein, because of the role he played in getting Larry Doby and Satchel Paige up to Cleveland in the American League, and some other players like Minnie Mignoso. But I think there was just a lot of frustration. And remember, and I know SABR went through a very big tumultuous debate several years ago about, did Vec really have this idea of trying to, buy the Phillies and stock them with all black players? My brother and I are convinced that it was a real thing, that it was a plan. Now, did they take it very far? Did Landis sabotage it? Who knows? Was it an idea and just they had too much else going on and they gave up on it? It's possible. Did Landis undercut it? Who knows? But if you think about it, I think that at the time it was considered such a tough obstacle that in some ways it might make sense that they say, well, look, let's just form an all-black team. And if we can get them playing white teams, maybe over time, the idea of a black player being on a white team might not be quite so novel. They will have been around black players, even if they weren't on their own squad. So, and keep in mind also, right at this time, Dizzy Dean and his white all-stars are playing Satchel Paige and his all-stars. So black and white teams are playing against each other in the off season. So in many ways, the idea, which I think initially when I read about it seemed kind of crazy, oh, Saperstein and Vec wanted to do what? It doesn't seem so bizarre when you put it in that context. But, I think segregation was still in 1938, the bridge too far. And in some respects, the comment from Powell and the reaction kind of tells us why.
Karen Holleran, go get him. How you doing, Karen?
Fine. I was wondering, what would his legacy be?
Well,
to deal with if he'd have to tell somebody, what would he like his legacy to be?
if Jake Powell could somehow spring back to life, what would he want his legacy to be?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good question. I mean, I guess in an ideal world, right, we might like to think that if he came back to planet Earth, maybe he'd feel a little differently about race and racism, and maybe he would realize he was wrong. That may be a little too sugar-coated. But you saw ESPN's Wolf. His take was that while he doesn't praise what Powell did, he feels that what may have come out of it was a deeper discussion about Black players, Black athletes, Black fans, their place in the game, And I think, the Morning Call article from Paterson, New Jersey, kind of tells you that that the incident did get people starting to talk about, well, should there be black players? What about relations between whites and blacks? So I think there were some things that started to bubble up. I think it would be going a bit far to say that this led directly to, Branch Rickey deciding he wanted to bring Jackie Robinson on. But I think as one of many, many different elements, it made it harder for Major League Baseball to ignore the issue of race and racial barriers. So I guess that's kind of my take.
Okay, thank you.
Very interesting there. Joe Ross, you're it. Go get him.
Thank you. Great story.
Do me a favor and unmute Joe. Sorry about that.
If you really don't want to hear me,
I know. Yeah. Well, we know you. Sorry about that.
Matt, great presentation. I loved it.
Thanks,
You mentioned Bill Veeck. He's one of my all-time favorites because in 47, he hired Larry Doby as the first American League black player. And then in 48, I know the Sporting News said that when he hired Satchel Paige, that was a travesty. That's what the Sporting News told him. And of course, his answer was, if he were white, he would have been in the majors 25 years earlier. Now, we don't know that it's 25 years earlier because we really don't know how old Satchel really was.
Yeah. Satchel's great line was that somebody said, well, how old are you? He said, well, I don't know, and none of us know. And the reason is my mama wrote it down inside the Bible, but the goat ate it one day. He always had a way, but I think, think about it. Page instantly became the oldest rookie, at least at that point, oldest rookie in Major League Baseball at the age of 42. That was officially, to the best we can determine, his age at the time. But what was pretty daring about Veeck was he was very cautious about Page. I mean, he and people said, well, he just wasn't used to seeing him. No. He had seen Page pitch many times over the previous 2 decades. He knew about Page and he knew how good he was. His questions to Saperstein were, does he still have it? Because at one point, even Saperstein had said he's lost his high hard one, is kind of how he put it. That high fastball, the top of the zone, he's lost that. Well, part of that was, I think many of you know about Mexico. He went down there and played in the Mexican leagues, and he got a sore arm the first time that seemed to happen. And there were people who said, you're not going to pitch ever again. He was able to work his way through it and developed a couple of additional pitches. So he wasn't always throwing fastballs, well, at least not with the frequency that he did. But, he ended up being a factor. It's funny. Doby had a really good World Series in 48, right? And really validated his pick. People forget, though, they made it to the World Series only because they won that 1-game playoff against the Red Sox. Mm-hmm. They ended the season tied with Boston. And so on the one hand, you say, well, he only won 6 games for the Indians, Satchel Paige. He only won 6 games. Yeah, his record was 6-1. So a net 5 wins was pretty big when if you have 1 fewer win, you're not going to make that playoff game, which they went on and beat the Boston Braves. But so Veeck is a fascinating guy. I mean, he's a lot like Saperstein. That's why they got along so well. They both came from the Chicago area. They both believed that baseball is not a game, it's a show. And
well, the 25-year earlier comment came because the Sporting News printed and said, if he were white, he would not have drawn a second thought. And that's when Veeck said, if he were white, he would have been in the majors 25 years earlier. All true.
Yeah.
I think that also just based on what I've read, Page probably could have pitched when he was 60, maybe 70.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about the guy was he was so amazing at the gate. I mean, the fans he brought in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember, I'm trying to think of the year, 1956. He goes down and the Miami Marlins, then a minor league club, announces we're going to have him pitch. I can't remember, 3 or 4 innings. He wasn't going to go the whole distance. They announced he's gonna play. He's gonna start and he's gonna pitch several innings. 51,000 plus fans. I mean, you know, the Marlins have a hard time drawing that many fans in a week. I mean, you know, it's you know, that's something, right? I mean, in 1956, what he would have been, I guess, 50 years old at that point. Glenn, I'm jabbering on. Go ahead, please.
Glenn, you're up.
Yes, I just want to say that Bill Veeck was the reason. I was reading a book called I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, I was reading a book that talked about Veeck's possibility of acquiring the Phillies, and it interested me in getting into baseball research, which I'd always been a fan of, and I started thinking about what players would he have gathered together for the Phillies to compete in a championship season. And while I was doing that, that's what drew me into SABR. And I got a chance to, in 2003, at the Harrisburg Jerry Malloy Conference, make a presentation. And I made a presentation about what my research was. And I said, I may have missed the golden age of Negro League baseball, but I am extremely delighted to be present for the golden age of Negro League baseball research. And by golly, that 2003 until 2020, when they recognized the Negro Leagues as major leagues, and all of that has been such an important part of my life. And I'm so delighted. And yeah, we have speculation about what Bill Veeck had intended and whatnot. But even the people who opposed the concept that Bill Veeck had really intended this, you know, they don't have substance to their arguments. And it seems to me that Bill Veeck really did intend this, and it was really unfortunate that he was curtailed by Judge Landis. And I just wanted to have to say that. Thank you.
We may never know the answer. We can kind of only really speculate, but one of the two people that Veeck said he was going to lean on to recommend black players, one was Abe Saperstein, the other was sportswriter Doc Young, black sportswriter. I think he was out in LA at that time. And, you know, remember, so Saperstein at that point had an ownership interest in the Birmingham Black Barons. So I am sure that if this story is true, and I'm inclined to believe that the scheme was real, right? How far they took it, who knows, and why it died. But probably several players, at least from the Birmingham Black Barons, would have found their way onto the Phillies. But again, that's my speculation.
Good stuff. Satchel Paige was 59 and still pitching in the major leagues. He pitched 3 innings for Kansas City at 65. Didn't he strike out? Was it Yastrzemski was the only one who got a hit off him, or did Yaz strike out?
Yastrzemski had a double off him. I think that was the only hit he gave up. That's not bad.
The only hit, yeah, but I couldn't remember who got it. I think you're right. It was Yaz.
Early in his career.
Ryan McClanahan, unmute, and you're up.
All right. Thank you again. So I had read something from, I believe it's Norman Matched, who had he had said about Landis, that Landis had said that it wasn't really the owners that had a problem with black ball players or Negro League ball players entering the majors, but it was the fans that didn't want them. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of the like the Pirates and a few other stadiums leased their stadiums to Negro League teams back in the 1940s. So I'm just I guess I'm just really kind of curious too that Clark Griffith had also said this too, and I think Griffith wanted to purchase Josh Gibson's contract in '38. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I've seen the same, that assertion, and I don't know, just what I've read of Clark Griffith, he was not somebody who was pushing the boundaries at all on this. He was pretty old school, I think, on the few things I've seen him talk about with segregation, and so I'm skeptical of that. Yeah, I know that kind of, I can't remember the writer who floated that or said he read something that implied that, but I would tend to doubt that.
Okay.
Another
right.
great line. Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan. Did I step on you?
Nope.
Okay. Another great line from the chat. Jeff Goen. Page's best pitch was his B-ball. Why the B-ball? It'd be where he wants it to be. That was one of Satch's lines. Joe, you're up.
Yeah, the other thing I think that's important about Bill Veeck, he also offered a contract to Cool Papa Bell when Bell was 48, and again to Buck Leonard when Leonard was 44 years old. Neither one of them took him up on it, but the fact that he offered it, to me, says an awful lot about the person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I really respect about Veeck was, and look, while there's a good reason to respect Branch Rickey did not provide any compensation to the Negro League team from which he acquired Jackie Robinson. Bill Veeck did. Veeck gave compensation when he acquired Larry Doby from the Newark Eagles. It's again, the guy was, it's funny, in his autobiography, Hank Greenberg says, I'm having this conversation when I joined the Indians front office. I'm having this conversation with Bill Veeck, and he's talking about, boy, the government really mistreats the Indians. And he's like, well, what does the government have to do with our baseball team? He said, it took me a while to realize he was giving a lecture on how American Indians are treated and mistreated. And, he said it was just the guy really had this conscience,
Yeah. And he really wanted to move the ball forward.
Yeah, somebody asked a question in the chat, why would Saperstein cannibalize the Black Barons? Why would he? I'm not suggesting he would grab all the team members there and pull them up to the Phillies, but I think he would have looked at least bringing up 3 or 4 players and tried to bring them up. I think that would have been a key place he would have looked, just because his familiarity with that ball club. He knew those players well, and I think there's just that you're kind of cheating in that direction. But I'm not suggesting he would have, tried to grab 5 or 6, 7 players and bring them up. But I think he would have found 2 or 3 key players there to do that. It's hard to say. Remember, of course, the manpower situation being what it is. Just finding bodies, finding people who were available was a task. Thank you for, let's see, Dixie tells us that it was indeed a double. Yaz had the only hit that game.
Only pitcher Monboquet fan. Page left ahead, but homers by Tony C. and Frank Thomas allowed the Sox to win 5-2. Don Mossy lost it. Don Mossy, the owner of several epic photographs on Topps baseball cards. If you haven't seen them, just search them, and there's some great photographs. Anything else for Matt Jacob this evening? Oh my gosh, this has been a fantastic discussion. I can't begin to tell you how I've been anticipating this. It's been great. Glenn, go.
I just want to say that Don Mossy is my wife's favorite ball player.
Really?
He is the ugliest player that ever played in the major leagues. and Bill James will back me up on this. And she has said, I want all the Don Mossy cards, and I have cards of his available for her to view. So yes, thank you for mentioning Don Mossy. This is important to me.
If any of Don Mossy's family is watching this, oh man, go, Joe.
Is that an official statistic? The ugliest?
Yes.
Alec just put up a picture in the chat of one of his cards.
Absolutely.
Dixie, you're up. Go. Save me.
Well, he might not be the ugliest, but
Here
the conversation starts with him.
Oh man, here we go. Okay, I'm going to the chat. Warren's got a good question. How was Powell treated by the fans after his return? You mentioned the first game, but how was it in subsequent years?
Yeah, there's not a lot of coverage after that first series back when the Yankees were on the road in Washington. There's not a lot of commentary on it. And part of that is he really did not see much action after that first game. The bottles are all thrown. He had to be pulled off the field. As I said, he only started one of the next 28 games. So I think things probably did kind of cool down. But I looked to see, hey, 2 months later, the next season, are fans still getting, really enraged by seeing him take the field? And I didn't see any evidence of that. So I don't have much to tell you.
Alex stays in the chat, wants us to know that Mossy has a strong Mediterranean nose. Oh, help me. Who says we don't have a sense of humor out here? All right, I got to tell you, Matt, this has been a fantastic discussion. Thanks for doing this for us. It's great stuff, my friend.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, August 28th. That is 2 days from now, not next Monday, but this coming Wednesday. The new East Coast Cooperative, made up of 6 Northeast chapters, will bring you another Saber member, Matthew Prigge, with his Saber 52 presentation, the Baseball Card 300 Hitter, an Endangered Species. That meeting will start at 7 p.m. Eastern, and the link to join is in the new meeting booklet that was sent out in the Monday message. And finally, if you like what we're doing up here, please like and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you are a baseball fan watching this and you are not already, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community. Offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom, Saber boasts more than 35 different research communities, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world. For more information, go to saber.org/join today. Matt Jacob, you're awesome, man. You are fantastic.
It's a pleasure.
You get applause and thumbs up from everybody here that we can't see right now, but you can, and they're loving it. So I want to thank you again for doing this, Matt.
Thanks for asking me, Bruce. Take care.
My pleasure. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you Wednesday night at 7. Have a great night.